It's astounding to me that I think you started at Pierre Fabre in around 2019, and
Mhm.
such a large beauty brand to not have a PR department is astounding to me. We hear over and over that brands have big PR initiatives, but they don't have influencer marketing yet. So you really started from the bottom ground, which is really exciting, and also a huge challenge. I'm already curious, based on what you have said so far, what did you feel like were the biggest differences between doing PR work with a US team and like with US initiatives, and then working within these international teams?
Yeah, so I think with the US team, the trends and everything moves a little bit more fast paced. I would say when we were implementing things from the US to the international side, the international team was just a step behind, which in many ways was actually an advantage because we implemented it here and then went over to the international side. But I do think that you kind of get more for your buck with international, just influencers and strategies. I think that influencers are way more giving and agile internationally than on the US side. So it was very interesting because also each market was at a different speed. You'll see some influencers that were just like on it with like trends and like getting creative with different video components. And then you had other influencers that were just like, here is the still image, and that is what's going to work. So it wasn't like a copy and paste situation. Each market was different. And then it was taking the successes from the US and implementing that internationally.
Yeah, you've already started to touch on this concept of how influencer marketing started to shift from like still images to video and more creative type marketing. When you were starting to do influencer at like Neiman Marcus, what did influencer marketing look like at the time? And how has that shifted until now? Obviously, large transitions have occurred, but just paint us an image of what influencer marketing looked like back then.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because right when I started at Neiman Marcus, I feel like influencer marketing was just starting to really be taken serious. I think even when I initially graduated, it was like, oh yeah, influencers are part of your PR strategy. And we're like, yeah, sure, sure. And then they really started to evolve into that. When I was at Neiman's, the brand was more focused on growing their social following first. So I was doing a lot of imagery within like the store and then like pushing it on their social. And then that shifted to start using models that were influencers within our events. So I was then working with like scoping, okay, this is a beautiful model, but does she have a following? And how can I make sure that then, she's tagging Neiman Marcus within the events? And then for our bigger ones, we would then start inviting them and more for like the cocktail hours and the social to see how can we get some social love. And then we also started working with some influencers that were stylists, and they would come in and they would pull clothes and tag us. And so we would kind of do like we'll let you borrow these really expensive items as long as you bring them back, but you also have to give us credit for it. And so we grew with some of these stylists, like red carpet stylists, and also their celebrity clientele.
So already the beginning of the professional influencer, you were actually touching that space back then, which is something that's so common within the discourse of influencer marketing today, is these influencers that have other careers. And the reason that they seem authentic and have really engaged audiences is because they have that professional background. So these stylists that you were working with sounds like it was already the beginning of that.
Yeah, totally. And I think so much of my learning of how important relationships are within influencer marketing stemmed from my interactions at Neiman Marcus. There were also, sales people within the store that had really high clientele that they also were influencers within their own space. I think, an influencer to many can be someone who has a big following, but to some, it's like their neighbor that dresses really well and they're influencing them on what to purchase. And so like being able to really solidify those relationships and focus on like, okay, we have this small group of people that are influential. How can we grow with them? Really is something that I still implement today in all of my strategy and all of my relationships, all of my events.
That's so interesting. I'm excited to circle back to that around this concept of, growing with these influencers as a brand, but just a bit more on your career here. So what is one thing that you are most proud of from your career, and one thing that was the biggest learning moment or event activation that you did where you learned a lot?
I think the biggest thing that I'm proud about is the fact that there's such a charitable component to just PR and influencers and giving back. There's so many ways that we can make a difference and partner. And I think a lot of people look at the glitz and glamours and the cool campaigns and the end results, but I love giving back and making an impact. And I think with beauty specifically, when you provide someone with a product that is targeting a concern that they have, it just like changes their life. And being able to do that is really heartwarming to me. And I'm so passionate about like, how can I donate something? How can we partner with an organization that's making a difference? And I think my biggest learning within the industry perspective is that you truly never stop learning. I like to think that I am now forever a student of like social media tools and influencer marketing, because it's just every day is so different. My biggest learning curve was learning TikTok. I think that platform totally came out of nowhere. No one understood it. We knew it worked, but figuring out how it worked. So that was a very huge learning curve, because up until then, I think you finally feel like you have a groove. You understand like, the strategy. There's like, okay, you shift this, that worked well, this didn't. And then out of nowhere in the middle of a pandemic, you're just, here's this new tool that everyone's on and somehow you need to be on too.
And for brands that have kind of been around for a while, like Avène, René Furterer, any of these Pierre Fabre brands, to harness TikTok, some say is even more challenging, because it's a brand that many people know, but don't know it in this like spicy way that TikTok brands have grown, right? So how have you navigated that challenge?
I always like to use the fun example of trying to convince my chief marketing officer that derms dancing with products was okay. Like, I think that there's just like this professionalism to our brands, right? They have this deep rooted heritage of like French and pharmacy and being efficacious. And then it's like, here's like this TikTok trend that we want them to be a part of. But a lot of it was also test and learn. And I think once they started to see the comedic lens, or seeing that, yes, a derm can dance with a product and still be a derm, I think that started to shift a bit of it. I would say there were a lot of push and pull in terms of what we can do and can. And I think it's just a platform. I always like to say that it's like watching a Super Bowl ad. You want to make sure that it's entertaining and that you're placing your product, but that it's not like super in your face. So I think once they started to see the results, once they started to let go of the control, it started to resonate more with them. And then they understood every platform has its purpose. So TikTok is meant to be more playful and more comedian-like, where Instagram, you can get a little bit more serious, or YouTube is a little bit more long form. So it took a lot of educating versus being like, super passionate and saying, we have to do this. It's like, okay, well, this is why each platform is going to have a different piece of content. And this is why it'll work well.
So it sounds like some of the skills that have, gotten you far in this career are maybe curiosity, willingness to learn, patience working with your higher ups, comfortability with a test and learn environment. What would you say your other superpowers are that make you good at your job?
I think it's so funny you said curiosity, because that's, I think, one of my biggest. I believe I was like that child that asks way too many questions about everything, because I'm so curious. I love to learn. I love to dive into like strategies and get into the thick of like, what is a brand's ethos? Why do we want to do this? Where is the gray space? Where do we have the opportunity? I would say another big superpower of mine is that I'm agile and flexible, which is absolutely needed in a profession where it's continuously evolving. It keeps you on your toes. So I appreciate that, I can have that flexibility. And I think another one is just being creative. I think you do have to think outside the box. I love the light bulb moments where it's like, oh, this was a random idea that I was thinking about on my couch, and you see it come to life and then it works. So the creativity component, I think, is definitely a superpower as well.
Yeah, to kind of trust that instinct where you have that creative idea, but you don't know if it's going to work or not. I think that's the hardest part. I come from a background of PR, and there are a lot of ideas thrown at the table, and it's hard to tell which one is going to work.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
And I think it's being okay with it not working. Like, okay, we tried it and it didn't work, and that's okay too, which is also hard when it's your idea.
so obviously you now have many years of experience in this industry and are in this amazing position where you have the ability to affect change. What would you say some myths are about like getting into this industry, or moving up into it? So for any young people looking to get started in this industry.
Yeah, I think one of the myths in just like influencer marketing in general is I think we just undervalue influencers. In many ways, when you first start out, you think I'm just going to send them products and it's going to go well, and they're just going to organically talk about us because they want the products, and they're professionals as well. There's a lot of time and energy they take into creating this content and editing it, and so they should be paid. I think looking at influencers as your partners, they know what works well for their platform. I think on the brand side, sometimes we think that they're like our spokespeople, or just like it's a brand video and it's not meant to be that. Having some of that, again, agility and flexibility with allowing them to be creative within the guidelines that you provide them. I think then counter to that, another myth is that paid is the only way. I think when you're looking into like a strategy for influencers, there's so many little components that go into it. And I like to think of it as an influencer ecosystem, and paid is one component of that. You have your organic and you have your affiliate. So always looking at it from a lens of strategy and seeing, okay, this influencer works well for this, but this influencer doesn't work well for that. Trust yourself in that creativity and that flexibility, because I do think with influencers, not all influencers are the same. And I think my last big myth, which goes back to the relationship component, is that it's all about transactions, and relationships are something that are going to go with you throughout your entire career. And when you're speaking to an influencer, you don't know how big this person's going to become over time. You don't know, what their successes are going to be. And so be genuine in your outreach, look at their content, take the time in the beginning, and it'll truly pay off at the end. Like understand, okay, my brand can help them with this. They spoke about that. Build that genuine relationship, and it's going to follow you throughout your entire career in such a nice way, that when you do move to a different position, you're like, okay, I remember this influencer that I spoke to, that I took out to lunch, that I met at this event, and she has shown me XYZ organic. Like, let me now look at her from a paid capacity in this other role. And so I do think that sometimes we underestimate the power of relationships within influencer marketing.
Influencer marketing is such a combination of an art and a science. It's it must be one of the few careers you can have where you need such strong social skills and soft skills, as they call it, as well as, like quantitative skills, measurement, goal setting, budget setting.
Right.
All like these hard skills that come along with it. And I think that it used to be an industry where all of that wasn't as involved, but now influencer marketers have become these like growth marketers, performance marketers. And it's really become this combination of both of those sides of the brain.
Yeah, absolutely. I think of like in the beginning where we were just using them in campaigns, we weren't measuring what the reach was. It's like, okay, they came in a campaign, they mentioned the brand, that's a win for us. And now everything is so data driven. It's truly looking at like all of the analytics, what's working, what's not, but not losing then they're not robots, and not all of them are the same. So not losing that personable touch of being like, hey, how are you? I saw that you just got engaged. I saw that you just had a baby. Like, do you want these products? They're probably going to work well for you through your transition in this chapter of your life. So it is very much still maintaining that personable touch.
Right. The reason it works is because these people are humans, and therefore we need to be human back.
Exactly.
So you spoke a little bit about, this multi-pronged strategy or the influencer marketing ecosystem. When you started at Pierre Fabre, there was no influencer marketing program. And of course, it's, you can't start every part of that strategy at one time. So what were the building blocks in building this influencer marketing program? And what were the steps that you took?
Yeah. So when I first started, I looked at all the brands and I was like, oh my gosh, there's like nothing to base anything off of. So where do I start? And I started with building personalities for each brand. If this was a human, what would their personality be? And in that, it allowed me to make sure that each brand stood individual and it wasn't a copy paste situation brand over brand. So once I understood the personality, the objectives, what audience we can target, this one's for sensitive skin. This one can be used for tough to manage skin concerns. This one can be used for thinning hair. I started to build a directory, and the directory is still like my holy grail today that I am like so proud of. Like, this is my baby directory. And it started with a goal I set for myself, 15 influencers per brand per week that I was researching, adding to the directory, outreaching, sending product to. And time over time that grew. Every week I would sit and do research. I would go into Tracker. I would look for lookalikes. I would pull lists. I would then go into holes of like, this friend tagged this friend. So let me look at this friend. And once I had this list going, I had a rhythm with like, okay, here's my outreach. Did they respond? Did they receive the product? Let me follow up with them. And true, like that nitty gritty relationship one-on-one. Once that happened and upper management unlocked some funds for paid campaigns, I already had in mind who performed well, who genuinely was interested in the brand, who received product, who already had an understanding of the messaging. So I then took some of those influencers and activated them on the paid side while trickling in some bigger ones as well that, you know, we're then establishing that relationship through the paid side. And then after that, I then started to funnel in all of the others. So continuing that organic, looking at wider seedings through our PR agency. Like now we have a directory with over 1,000 influencers. Let's narrow that down to maybe a seeding of 150 that we know want to receive the product. And so that seeding then continued. And then after that, I started to look at the affiliate side because the affiliate to me is just such a happy in between of organic and paid. And so with that, it's very performance based. So now we look at, okay, we have the paid covered. We have the continuous additions going on in the directory. We have the seedings covered and we have the affiliate covered. And so that ecosystem now exists today where when we're looking at new product launches or we're looking at initiatives, it's like, okay, let's start with the organic. Who are we going out to? Who has received the product? Who has mentioned that they have this skin concern? Now we're looking at a seeding. Now let's build a campaign and messaging around that. And then how do we layer in the affiliate component as well?
So you said so many things in there that I have follow-up questions for, but I guess to start here, so you mentioned this idea of like a friend tagging another friend, and that's how you sometimes find influencers. And that kind of makes me think of this concept of community. One thing I've noticed is that there's some very successful campaigns that do just that, where an influencer tags another influencer. It kind of creates this idea of community, but also some of the most successful influencers are those that are really engaged with their audience and kind of create a community in their following. So is that something that's like part of your strategy? What are your thoughts on influencers that build community?
Yeah, it absolutely is. It's even interesting because I even played and did the idea of taking these influencers that are friends with one another and having them build content together. So, you know, we see some now, it's very like, okay, let's tap into your following and we can cross tag one another. How do we insert ourselves as a brand and have that conversation happen between the two? From an eventing standpoint, when we do events that we have specific influencer moments, I think that you're way more excited to attend an event if you know your friend's going. And then you see the selfies, you see the activations, you have someone to take content with you. So we've seen so much success with being like, okay, we know that these two are besties. Let's invite both of them and let's see. And they also then even like recommend one another too. Like I did this fun idea where it was like, we'll do a seating and let's actually have you tag or send products to 5 of your influencer friends. Easy. They were so excited to send their friends packages of products. And then I'm like, oh, that's a win for me because now I know this is your influencer friend that you will send products to, which now is part of my directory.
So what were the logistics around that? Did you like pay for the shipping for them to send these packages to their friends? Was it just like a note suggesting the idea?
Yeah, so we sent an email out, made it like, super interactive with the email. We did it for BFF. It's not National Best Friend Day, so National BFF Day. And then what we did is we covered all of the expense of sending the product, sent it directly from our office, and wrote a note card to the friend, like, this is from your friends, like, enjoy these products. She thought you may need it. And the nice part about it is that it was a collection that had a concern around it. So it was for thinning hair. So if you're sending this to your friend, it's because your friend's hair is thinning. And those are the type of then influencers that I want to partner with. I want to know that this collection is going to help them. And especially with thinning hair, something that can obviously be so vulnerable. So for them to feel so excited about helping a friend with this collection, it was such a win-win. And to the date, from a seeding perspective, it was one of the highest returns that we saw from engagement from this community of influencers, that we were like, okay, let's make sure that, we find another moment to do that it's not every year for BFF Day, but that it makes sense. Right. But with that, it doesn't cost us a lot. It's going back to that relationship building. Now you're allowing us to go into your personal life with your friends and your influencer group and send them products. And it's something that you're excited about and that we are too.
Yeah, I see this strategy work particularly well within the organic sphere. It's just like one more incentive piece. So I know that Glow Recipe, for example, had a few VIP influencers bring their roommate or partner on a recent influencer trip to Wyoming. And then I know in 2022, Tower 28 was a brand that often encouraged influencers to tag their friends, especially friends that are also in the AAPI community, because that's a brand that so, fights for anti-Asian hate. So it was like this nice combination of purpose-driven influencer marketing, but also community initiatives. So yeah, I've seen that work. Tell me a little bit more about your seeding strategy. How often is it successful? I think a lot of our clients are struggling right now with figuring out how to still make organic seeding work in this area where, as you said, people sometimes think that pay to play is the only way to do it.
Yeah, I think that seedings are very interesting because they have shifted so much over time. When I first started, it was like, go far and wide, send as many products as you can, because if you send more products, you're going to get more results. That's not really true. I think a big part of it is making sure that you are sending products to those that actually want the product and that follow-up is happening. I think seedings can become very expensive, especially if you're looking at, one of those boxes that it has all of the bells and whistles. Those boxes quickly add up. So sometimes it's truly us going to the basics. What are the fundamentals that they need to receive? Do they need to receive this kitschy thing that's probably going to sit in their apartment? Probably not. Is it something that's useful to them? Then yes, it is something that we're going to see. Like I know at one point, every influencer had the headband, the little puffy headband.
A cookie with their face on it.
Exactly. So it's like those little things where it's like, what can they use to create their content, or what can we give them as a prop to see it come live? And I would say that I've now narrowed down my seedings to be more strategic. So we're not doing a big seeding for every single campaign. That's a lot. Which campaigns are the ones that we can make the most splash with? And then where does the seeding sit within that strategy? So if we are looking to do a seeding, we know it's going to cost us X amount of thousands of dollars for 100, 200 people. But then we know, okay, this is going to impact our influencer paid campaign because now it's the same budget. So maybe it's us looking at, it's 75 really, really solid influencers that we know will talk about us versus 300 that sit in an abyss and then we never say anything about the brand. So I think maybe fewer, bigger and more strategic versus the more of the volume in how many.
So what I'm hearing from that is that you're pretty careful about your seeding list and you're kind of always revising it in terms of who posts about you, but I'm sure also like who performs well. Is that correct?
Yeah. And then we look at who's opted in. So I have like a directory of ongoing bi-monthly newsletter that we tap into our directory to send them products. So who's engaged with the brand at different touch points before? Who do we know is going to probably be responsive to it? I look at every single influencer that's going to get a product. I look at their analytics. I look at their audience. I also look at their content. Are they talking about, like, there's specific influencers that do once a week unboxings? Great. That's the type of influencer I probably want to send product to, because even if it's like an organic mention on their stories does garner a lot of interest and a lot of engagement. So that's always a great win. Obviously, we want to make sure we get on the feed, but we also need to be realistic with how much you will get for a seeding versus looking at an influencer's page that is very beautiful, but she talks nothing about anything beauty related. You never see anything in her highlights. You never see anything in her stories. I would be more mindful of sending that influencer a product unless, there's a bigger story behind it.
We've talked a little bit about the organic side then. And then when you were telling me about building up this influencer marketing program, you mentioned that execs started to kind of believe in influencer marketing and allow you to put budget towards paid. So I'm curious to know what your experience was in convincing executives that your influencer marketing program was worth it. And how do you continue to do that, especially as presumably budgets need to increase as this industry gets bigger?
Yeah, I tend to have like my CFO's voice in the back of my head when I look at analytics, because I think I'm going to be challenged with, why did we pay this influencer this amount and why did it work? So analytics to me are truly, truly my best friend. I look at these KPIs that I set in the beginning of the campaign, which can be very alien talk to other people in cross-functional teams. So I don't only just try to pull my KPIs, I then look at sales. So during this time frame that this campaign went live, whether it's a month, how do we track what the sales look like? And then what was the growth year over year? So last year, if we didn't have a campaign during this time, can we show the impact? I provide trackable links to all of our influencers because, we're going to drive to a specific retailer, whether it's our own.com or a retailer partner. And we can then see the traffic that each influencer drove to that. I provide them with discount codes because some of these influencers, they have such an engaged following that their audience is purchasing. I also look at social following because, sometimes we measure the success of, well, when this influencer went live, we saw a spike of following to the brand's page by X amount. That's a win for us because that following growth didn't happen 2 weeks before when there was no campaign going on. And then I look at the earned media value. So we invested X amount in this campaign. We saw an earned media value of this amount. What was our ROI on that? And then that is truly how I sit and I convince them. And then Tracker's benchmark tool is my absolute favorite because it allows me to see our competitors. And of course, as a brand, we want to know, what are our competitors doing? How many people are they partnering with? So I would take that benchmark report and be able to showcase, okay, this is where we stand competitively against XYZ brands. If we want to really compete, the volume of influencers that they're activating, they're blowing us out of the park. So in order for us to even want to become of their size or larger, we need to invest more because this is the number that we're up against. And I think when they're able to see that, from a holistic perspective, okay, the sales were impacted in this way. We saw this many growth. We saw ROI of this. And then there's also these partners, these competitors that we know we want to compete against, then that they kind of become convinced in that sense. I still do think there's challenges that come with it because you don't necessarily see the sales right away, right? Like you have your unicorn influencers that you're like, oh my gosh, this person just drove all of these people to our website. But sometimes it's a slow burn and that's okay too. So I think it's truly taking bits and pieces of different aspects and showcasing it as like, this is a holistic approach to all of the things that it impacts us on. I also, while I love the analytics, I don't try to get stuck in them either, right? Because also influencer marketing is an awareness tool. And we have to stick true to the fact that there is an awareness that's being built on the brand. That does take time. It takes, a person a lot of different touch points to finally be convinced to purchase a product. And influencers are one of those touch points. So we also have to make sure that, we're funneling into the other ones as well.
I love everything you just said, and they're really topics that my team and just Tracker in general is thinking a lot about right now. It sounds like you're kind of measuring attribution in many different ways, which I think is critical here. And just like what you were saying about loving the analytics, but also not only relying on them. Again, it reiterates this idea that it is an art and a science. Can you tell me a little bit more about what you were saying in terms of tracking like sales sessions or like seeing a peak in sales? And how comfortable would you say bringing that topic when you bring that topic to your execs? How comfortable are they with that storyline when you can't always show this like direct attribution if you're thinking of influencer marketing as this awareness tool?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're comfortable with it. It's not, when there's a specific influencer campaign, I think the best case scenario is when there's just the campaign going on. And then when there's a boost, and we see that. Where it gets a little challenging is if you are driving to a retailer that's not your own, because you are at the mercy of what they're willing to provide from a sales perspective. But we are able to showcase, okay, during this time, this product that was fifth in the store is now second in the store. And that's a huge win, because I'm like, okay, well, there's nothing else happening aside from that campaign. So clearly these influencers drove that. Or, there was one year where we did a National Dry Shampoo Day campaign, and we were out of stock of the product within hours of the influencers going live. And we had a robust amount of influencers go live. That's always the best case scenario. I do think there's going to be some challenges. Well, there was a marketing promo going on, or there was this going on. And that's where it goes into like, well, we're all working together. And without the influencers driving that awareness, would consumers then know about that promo, or would they know to go to click on that? And that's where all the other little components come in handy, like, the trackable links, looking at their performance. So it's hard. It's not an apples to apples scenario every single time. I think, there's still some mistrust in like influencer marketing, because it's not a 1-for-1 scenario. It's not, you're not going to see it right away. I like to make sure that I pull all of the analytics within the month of the campaign. And so I'm constantly going to like my brand team, to the sales team, like, what was the performance of sales during this time frame? What was the performance of the specific SKU that the influencer was talking about during this time frame? Where do we look at that year over year? If it is a campaign that I always do every year during that time frame, then I challenge myself, like, okay, last year, this is where we sit. Like, where do we sit this year? And thankfully, we just continue to grow, because also the investment continues to grow. So that's also even a nice story to tell. Last year, we were here with this investment and we did this. If you invest more, we will probably be able to activate more influencers, which is then going to give us a better impact. And time over time, that scenario has played out where, we do partner with more, you get a better result, and then you see more of that sales drive in. I've even gotten to the point, which is really shocking, that at, mid-year, they're like, here's more budget. I'm like, okay, great. And then we're able to do more. I'll take it. Thank you. But I still think it's something that, to executives, it's really challenging. To your point, it is an art and a science that if you're not in the thick of it, it's really hard to always convey, like, we know it works. We know it's powerful. We know we need it. We need you to believe that, but they're not going to believe that without language that they're used to, or the analytics that they're used to seeing.
I think it's really smart the way that you are taking the investment numbers that you had maybe 3 years ago, and like you grew your investment 20%, and as a result, our performance grew X%. And like, if you were to do that again, this would be our strategy, and we foresee that happening again. Like, that's a very smart story. story to be telling. I also love that you're having such a close relationship with the sales numbers and whoever might be reporting that back to you. I think constantly asking those questions and like finding as many data points as possible, even if you're not using all of them, is really strategic.
Yeah.
And out of curiosity, we're kind of talking about these different areas of the marketing funnel and how there are your influencers that you use trackable links with. But some influencers tend to convert really well, maybe on Instagram stories or elsewhere. And some influencers drive really high engagement and awareness. Would you say that you segment your influencer strategy based on those different micro goals? Or you're just kind of like hoping that they'll do one or the other and you're happy with any of those results?
I think it's the first. So I look at with what each role the influencer would play. And there are some influencers that we've partnered with before that you see that they have incredible story views or saves. I think it's really fascinating to see the evolution of saves because it really does still play into that touch point of a person is engaging with the product, they've saved it, they're going to go back to it at some point. Let's continue to target them and talk to them. So those are the awareness drivers. I've been able to see really well some of the influencers that convert because of the affiliate component. So being able to see how they're selling with their affiliate commission and taking them out at certain points of that affiliate and putting them into the paid, knowing that I know that you performed well during this campaign because your audience looks at you and your recommendations and they purchase. So it's like having the awareness drivers and then having the sales drivers within that. It's like the happy marriage of the two because there's different types of influencers for everything too. You have those influencers that are constantly sharing their storefronts and sharing their trackable links of like where to purchase the things.
Right, like
and you just have
influencers.
Exactly. And then you still have the other ones that are just sharing what they like and people are Googling or going on Amazon or whatever to find whatever they're sharing. So it's important that we target all of those. And something that's also huge is the expert. I think since COVID, like derm talk has grown so much. I think consumers are now looking to experts to drive some of that understanding, that education, and that purchase for them. So even that sits within a specific layer that it's like, we have the expert, we have the awareness driver, we have the consumer, like the e-commerce affiliate influencer in there as well. And then they're all working and going live around the same time. So it's like all these different types of influencers speaking to different audiences.
So many great tidbits here, and just I'm learning so much. We talked a little bit about community marketing, so we don't have to like touch on this for too long, but out of curiosity, so we ran this survey from Tracker and we found that when asked, 81% of influencer marketing professionals rank finding the right influencer as one of the main hurdles to overcome when trying to build a successful influencer marketing program. But of course, you can't grow your program, you can't grow your community of influencers if you're not also retaining the influencers that you have strong relationships with. So what would you say your strategy of retention is? Is that something that you measure? And what would be your advice for brands to improve, ROI by increasing retention?
Yeah, I think when I first started looking at some of the influencer retention, it became really apparent to me that there's just some specific influencers that if there is no relationship with the brand beforehand, or they genuinely look at it like a transaction, there's not going to be any retention. It's going to be a one and done. You're never going to hear from them again. But I also think it's our role to make sure that we're continuing to engage with them at different touch points. So I do have this directory that I keep referring to. And once an influencer goes live within that campaign or moment, they then become part of our directory. And then I have different touch points and I'm still talking to them throughout. So are we sending them a newsletter that's bi-monthly where they can opt in to receive products? Is there another moment that I can partner with them in a different capacity? Is there an affiliate program that I can put them into to entice them to continue speaking about the brand? Or is there a discount code that I can provide them? Like, I know they went live for this specific campaign. We'll have another moment where we're talking about the same concern. Can I activate them in a different way? So I think when you're looking and taking the time to find find these strategic partners, and then you pay them or they go live, then retaining them is going to be up to your time and effort and strategy of finding different touch points to continue speaking about it. And I also think in general, when they're passionate about, maybe it's an industry like there's a lot of sensitive skin influencers or acne influencers, when they're truly passionate about what they're speaking to their audience and they find products that work for them, you're going to see some of that organic love continue, which is always great because that's what we would want. And then we partner with them again. So I do think
really
that
strategic sourcing therefore helps the retention, because if you're being super smart with your sourcing in finding these influencers that are very passionate about sensitive skin, and you know that your products work for sensitive skin, then you're more likely to retain those influencers after that first post.
Exactly. And I also think like in many ways, we all want to go viral. Everyone's goal, like as an influencer marketer, like if I can go viral every time, my job will be amazing. It'll be done. And I think with that, we just look at, okay, there's these big influencers and we need to go after them. And they're the ones that we need to partner with. Yes, there's a space for those big influencers, but those are probably not the ones that you're going to retain. Like making sure you're getting into the thick of research and looking at, what their audience is, looking at their content. What do they talk about? What are they passionate about? Can they be passionate about my brand? If they can't, then most likely they're just going to take the paycheck and then not talk about us again. That's the reality of it. Of course, they're going to want to partner, with and brands, but where is that relationship standpoint after they go live? And that's something that I also look closely in when I'm then going to activate influencers again. So if I'm repeating a campaign partner, it's like, okay, well, did they give us any love from this campaign that happened last year until now? They performed really well for us, but also I want to make sure that they actually genuinely love the brand. And are they still talking about it? And so I think the best success I've had is in looking at it, taking more time up front, because the research of it does take time. You do have to look into the weeds of it. And when you're doing it for various brands at one time, it can just be very time consuming, but maximizing the tools that we have at our disposal and really building that relationship. And again, that follow up and those different touch points after.
So you've kind of been painting this image of if there's like a new campaign coming up and you're thinking about who to partner with. So say it's, November of 2023 and you're preparing for your December campaign, but you're also like planning for 2024. How do you go about setting goals for a campaign and setting goals for your program overall?
Yeah. So if it is looking at first the time frame of the year and then looking at the trends going on the platforms, like there's specific times of the year. I know even last year, engagement rates were down on specific platforms. And so when I look at what my goal ultimately is like, how am I going to get through this shuffle? And I have to be realistic with how this is going to perform. Then I look at, some of the competitors and what are some of the recent campaigns that they've been doing? Where do we track against that? Setting myself then the KPIs that make sense. I know for sure if I go live November, December, my campaigns, unless there's paid media spend behind it, may be tough because it's holiday time and everyone is activating around that time. So how do we make sure that the content is going to be really impactful, that people are going to want to engage with it? How do I make sure that it makes sense to our time? There's been moments where I've had to sit and say, while I would love to run an influencer campaign, I don't think it's in our best interest. I think we should hold and maybe wait a month or two and then be able to have our products shine versus going through all this noise. So with that, setting what makes sense for that time period, looking at the trends, looking at our competitors, and looking at our historic campaigns and how they performed.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. A lot of our clients tend to measure their share of voice within whatever metric that they're looking at in influencer marketing. So that might be engagements, video views, our VID metric. But what I see is that so many brands tend to, especially so for example, skincare, they might do this big holiday activation in December. They might do something else in like February, March about, dry skin in the winter. And then they do another big activation in May, June around sunscreen. And so many brands follow that schedule. But of course, then your share of voice during that time period is going to be so much smaller when so many other brands are doing it at exactly that time. So it's really interesting that you're thinking about these things and you're saying like, maybe let's delay a little bit. There's no reason why we have to do it right now.
Right. And finding those ownable moments. I think there's just so many ownable conversations that we don't tap into. And if we find an ownable conversation during a maybe not so popular time of the month, we're probably going to win because we're now, executing that in a bigger way. And we're not up against all of this noise constantly. And sometimes it's even like, we know sunscreen is super important, one of the most important things, but do we need to talk about it in June? Why can't we talk about it in April or in May? When people are year-round thing. Exactly. You should be wearing it year round. So let's also talk about it year round. So owning that too, right? Like maybe we're the brand that we talk about sunscreen every single month. And that is going to also resonate with the consumer because we're not just thinking it's a seasonal thing. It's a yearly thing.
Great. So to wrap up here, can you share what you think the next biggest changes or challenges will emerge in the influencer marketing industry that folks should know about?
I think it's going to be influencer inflation. Honestly, I think that while it's super important to pay influencers for their content creation and the enormous work that goes, behind their videos, I think the rates have been very high. And while, there are brands that can pay that, we see the amazing campaigns and the lavish trips. That's great, but I don't think that everyone can sustain that, even from a ROI perspective. Mm-hmm. So I think brands are really going to start looking into the nanos and the micros that, they are more affordable. They still have great engagement rates, and they still give you really great exposure, and you can go far and wide with them. So maybe it is going to look to like micro, nanos, mid-tiers, a lot more of those that you can afford within your campaigns. I also think that affiliate marketing is going to be a big thing. I think it's going to continue to grow because it is very performance-based. It's the in-between between organic and paid. And influencers do have to work hard to see some of that return, but you do have the e-commerce influencers that are killing it in that space. And I think that's going to be really enticing to more influencers to join. Brands are going to start partnering with them in wider ways. I think a big part of it is, we're constantly always challenged with our budgets and our spend. So how do we make sure that, we're not spending all of our budgets in one influencer, but still getting really amazing results using various ones?
Great. That kind of wraps us up here, but I think that everything you just said is likely. I mean, we see that, reach is so much less of an inhibiting factor these days with algorithms, pushing micros content all the time. So I certainly learned a lot here. So thank you so much. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Fast Track. If you're interested in connecting with Elena, you can find her LinkedIn or Instagram profile linked in the show notes.